Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good Friday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with you on this 18th of March. As always, we encourage you to go here, weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. Give us a call on the weather info line. We know there's been some trouble getting through on the line lately. We've had some technical difficulties around the state. Keep trying that number, and there are some other numbers that we can give you to try as well. The one that we usually like to supply, 800-472-0391, may be a little bit on and off for a while, so bear with us. We will get that fixed. In the meantime, social media is always a good place to go. NWS Alaska on Facebook, NWS Alaska on Twitter, as well as NWS Fairbanks, NWS Juneau, NWS Anchorage if you like to localize your information. Ask questions to those accounts. You can post snow pictures or just check in on the local weather there with a hashtag AKwx as well. On YouTube, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing. And of course, search the YouTube search bar for AKwx TV and find this show in its entirety later on in the evening after you watch it here, of course. Now, here's my friend. Let's just call him Bill. Tsunami Bill. I have to make sure everybody else knows that here. Chill, it's a drill, Bill. The Alaska statewide test of the tsunami warning system is coming up on Wednesday, March 30th, 10:15 in the morning. And as you will recall from previous tsunami warning system tests around the state, if you're along the coast, that's when you might hear the siren. That's when you might see the crawl across the bottom of your screen. That's when you might hear somebody on Alaska Public Media Radio talking about a tsunami drill. That's a good time to practice what you will do in a real tsunami warning. That's Wednesday, March 30th at 10:15. Now, if you're in the interior, chances are you won't get that alert. If you're on the North Slope, you probably won't get the alert. But if you're in Sand Point, Cold Bay, Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, anywhere out around Adak and Atka, Shemya, Southeast, South Central, Homer, Seward, Prince William Sound, Whittier, anywhere along the Cook Inlet, you will probably get this tsunami warning system test. Make sure you practice what you would do in a real tsunami warning. It's that important, that critical. And if you don't get that information, let us know so we can get that fixed. So when it counts, it gets to you and you know what to do because you've practiced your drill. No tsunami information today, though. That's a good thing. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation, and wow, it looks like something's going on this weekend. Just in time for the weekend is snow. If you have your sled ready to go, that's probably good, but keep in mind conditions are going to be changing, not only road conditions, but with heavy and wet snow moving into the area, there's a possibility for slides to develop across some of the more favored slopes. So just be careful, know where you're going, make sure somebody else knows where you're going, and whether that's skiing, sledding, snow machining, whatever you like to do, just have a plan, keep it safe, and make sure someone else knows where you're going to be, and take your beacon with you. Here's a look at some of the snow total possibilities we have on top of the warnings. In yellow, winter weather advisories. The red areas are a little bit more severe amounts of snow. Those are winter storm warnings there, so those stretch all the way from the Yukon Flats to the upper Tanana Valley, the 40-mile country, the eastern Alaska Range, and out toward Denali. Now, south of the park, it looks like it's where we're going to see the most amount of snow, 10 to 16 inches there. Elsewhere, north of the Denali Park entrance, about 4 to 8 inches. That, of course, would include Healy. And northward into the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, including the Fairbanks region, you're looking at about 3 to 6 inches around Fairbanks and east, and into the Deltana and Tanana Flats region about 4 to 7. Into the Yukon Flats, about 3 to 7 inches there around Fox, but northward toward the higher terrain, 8 to 14 inches. The highest amounts will be north of the Yukon Valley. Let's go west out toward Bettles and AKwx, and you're talking about 4 to 8 inches on the high side. The lower end of that, east out toward the Yukon Flats and southward toward Tanana, probably between 2 to 4, maybe 3 to 6 out toward Tanana under that winter weather advisory. Into the Copper River Basin, north and west of Glen Allen, about 5 to 10 inches of new snow. Elsewhere, about 3 to 6. Now, just because you don't have a shaded in color around your village or city doesn't mean you're not going to get snow. That's a double negative. It does mean you probably will get snow around Susitna Valley, the Anchorage Bowl, and the western Kenai Peninsula. Likely going to see a couple inches of snow. A much better chance of that around the Anchorage Bowl, northward into the Matanuska Valley and Susitna Valley. As we go into tonight and tomorrow, the onset for those other regions I just mentioned will be a little bit slower tonight into tomorrow. But then on Sunday, it looks like there's a chance for rain to mix in with that. So a little bit of snow maybe to start, and then it might get a little bit wetter on top of that. The best chance for accumulating snow is around the Denali National Park region and southward into the eastern Alaska Range and the upper Tanana Valley in the 40-mile country, and then north of the Yukon Valley. Enjoy your winter while you can. Spring is trying really hard to come this way. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and you can see low pressure across the Gulf. It's spreading its moisture all the way across the north and the western Gulf Coast. Not a really sharp boundary to work with there. The moisture, though, is the big part of this puzzle, as that's moving northward with surge after surge after surge. Colder air is descending across the Bering Strait and working across the west coast. Now, as these two parts of the weather picture combine across south central and across the middle Tanana Valley and eastward, especially into the Copper River Basin and northward along the Alcan, the Eagle, and the Yukon Flats, that's where we're going to get our snow production really enhanced and really going in a pretty good and efficient manner. But across the west, you're not going to have that moisture. You will get the cold, and as that cold drops down across the west coast, things are going to be noticeably different, I think, by the time you get into Sunday and Monday. Not only is that going to pick up the wind across places like Dillingham toward Bethel and into Monarch and Unalakleet and Anvik. Places like that are going to get cold, and winds are going to come out of the north and northeast. But you'll also start to see a slightly better chance of snow as we get into Sunday, as some of this moisture wraps back around low pressure that's going to strengthen right here across south central Alaska. The other thing it's going to do is probably start shifting that ice edge a little bit further to the south and west and begin to grow the ice here across the Bristol Bay region. As we look at the satellite picture one more time, you can see a weak area of low pressure here west of Adak. It's really not much to write home about. Might stir up the winds a little bit more heading into the weekend, but the big weather story is barely seen on the map right now, but it will be by Saturday and Sunday. Low pressure across south central, generating snow across the Alcan border in the middle Tanana Valley, even the central interior, and then bringing down the cold across the west coast. Now up north, the cold is already there. Temperatures today have been miserable, it looked like, anywhere from 15 to 25 below in some cases. We'll check those in just a minute. But the surface chart already shows the beginning of this winter weather pattern. The boundary sitting just hovering right over the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound, all the way out toward the Alaska Peninsula. There's our weak area of low pressure at 1,005 millibars, but the Big Daddy high, 1,053 millibars across the Chukchi Sea, is cold and rough, tough, and hard to bluff. It's dropping southward slowly, and the wind should pick up across the Brooks Range here. You'll notice that with blowing snow in some of those areas first. Periods of rain and snow should be expected around the eastern Aleutians, including Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, and snow may begin across the Kenai Peninsula, but probably and already across the Copper River Basin and northward toward Delta Junction, and even further north toward Eagle and Fairbanks later on tonight. As you look out toward the south and east, more clouds than anything else across the Panhandle today and tonight, but you'll see a better chance for some rain to start picking up as we get into Saturday. Low pressure across the Kenai Peninsula and the Chugach drops to 998 millibars, and that is when the fun starts to begin for winter weather. Notice these waves of cold air dropping southward. Each one of these forming on high pressure as it's pushing that cold air southward quickly. In the meantime, Gulf moisture is working northward, and this starts our snow machine across the interior. And again, south of Denali, could see anywhere from a foot to a foot and a half of snow easily south of the park entrance there. As we get into Sunday, you can see it's still going. There's a better chance for that low pressure system to drift westward just a little bit. That puts more of south central Alaska in the warmer sector there, and that means snow may begin the day, but it could mix in with or completely change over to rain as you work up and down the Cook Inlet and into the Susitna and Matanuska valleys as well. Snow is still possible to develop from Nome into the Norton Sound region and into the upper Kuskokwim and the lower Yukon valleys there. So you're not out of the weather picture yet, but the thing that it will be noticeably different about will be the cold air dropping southward across the YK Delta. Snow showers are expected across the chain and the Alaska Peninsula, and rain showers will be back for southeast, a little bit more predominant in your day than they have been, and snow is possible in places like Yakutat. Look for that to mix in as well from Prince William Sound eastward all the way toward Yakutat in the northern parts of southeast. A lot going on this weekend. Be careful out there. 40s and 50s in southeast today, a sign of that warm and wet air working up the east coast, for sure around Ketchikan, Craig, and Klawock. Sitka at 50 degrees, 52 in Hyder. Capital City in the lower 40s, 30s for most of Prince William Sound. We saw rain and snow around Valdez today, 40 in Seward, 35 in Homer, 32 in Anchorage around Talkeetna. It was 30 degrees. Cantwell showing 27, 10 around Healy, 14 in Fairbanks, 1 degree warmer in Eagle this afternoon. It was 9 above in Fort Yukon, but 9 below in Barrow, and 14 below a little bit further down the road in Atkasuk, with Wainwright at 7 below. 5 above for Kivalina. Wales seeing 6 below with 7 degrees above in Nome today as people continue to work their way toward the Burled Arches there. 5 above in Unalakleet. Looked like Anvik was 9 above. Galena 5. 13 in Bethel, with temperatures around the Bristol Bay region in the upper 20s to upper 30s there. Lake Iliamna 35. Lower to mid 40s for Kodiak Island. Low 30s for St. Paul and St. George. The Bering Sea coast of the Alaska Peninsula in the mid 30s. Sandpoint and southward in the mid 40s there. Central and western parts of the chain were only in the 30s again today. Here's a look at overnight lows. Look for temps below 0 in Fairbanks. Once again, still plenty of dry air there. And for the North Slope, anywhere from 15 to 30 below. Some of the coldest around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. 5 below for Nome. Looks like teens for most of Bristol Bay, all the way out toward Bethel at 5. 20s and 30s for the Peninsula and Eastern Chain. 25 in St. Paul. Southeast, you're looking at temps above freezing with Sitka at 40. Ketchikan, Craig, and Klawock still fairly mild as well. For South Central, we'll start in the teens, make it into the upper 20s to low 30s around Prince William Sound. The interior warming into the upper 20s to about upper teens to about 20, I should say. 12 in Fort Yukon, 8 below in Barrow, 10 above in Nome. Southwest in the low to mid 20s. And the Alaska Peninsula to the Eastern Chain in the upper 30s to about 40. St. Paul 27, with Southeast back in the upper 40s for most areas. A few places will probably touch 50. Flying weather in the morning will be the worst across the Copper River Basin, Prince William Sound into the Matanuska Valley and eastward into the 40-mile country around the Brooks Range and the central and western chain there with MVFR. VFR conditions for most parts of southeast. Look for a few changes there by the afternoon with IFR conditions around Prince William Sound and the Chugach, as well as areas in the eastern Alaska Range northward into the Tanana Valley and into the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. For Adak and Atka, watch for IFR conditions to develop there in the afternoon. Here's your pass conditions. VFR conditions expected to develop for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass throughout the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be pretty good. Rainy Pass, probably MVFR throughout the day. In the afternoon especially, Windy Pass turning over to MVFR after an IFR start. Same goes for Isabel Pass on your Saturday. Mentasta Pass, we expect IFR to start your day with snow flying there. And for Tanita Pass, we expect snow to increase in that region and worsen visibility. Portage Pass, not going to be a great day on the east side. IFR there. And Chilcoot and White Pass right now showing VFR. So smooth sailing it looks like as well. Freezing levels show that warm and wet air is not as accentuated as it was this time yesterday. The surface freezing line is dropping southward, and this is going to be changing around south central Alaska over the next couple days, so keep an eye on that. Icing potential will generally be worst above 3,000 feet. There will probably be some pockets of occasional moderate embedded in that with efficient snow production. Not a big surprise there. And for the central and western chain, watch out for at least light to probably occasional moderate in some cases there. As we look at the jet stream, low pressure sitting across the central Gulf. The big powerhouse of weather in the superhighway is generally south of Alaska, but it's got a little extra help there, a little diversion coming in off the Bering Sea coast and the Chukchi Sea, and that's allowing that cold air to mix in with the warm and wet air across the Gulf. It's working from top to bottom, and this will be an opportunity for some good snow across the eastern interior all the way down to some parts of south central Alaska. At 9,000 feet, you see our southeasterly winds working up from 30 to 40 knots. An easterly flow across the Brooks Range also at 30 to 40. Here's our northeasterly flow coming through the Bering Strait, about 20 to 30 knots there. And then our weak area of low pressure south of the central chain. At 3,000 feet, faster moving winds across the north slope. That's working in at 50 knots. Winds are still a little bit stronger here southward, anywhere from 35 to 45 knots across the Yukon Valley. The west coast looking at 20 to 40 knots across the west coast to St. Matthew. The chain looking at winds from 30 to 40, and south and easterly winds working up southeastern coast around 20 to 35. South central's winds in Kodiak looking at about 30 to 45 around that low pressure system. So there will be turbulence, and some of that could reach occasional moderate from the Brooks Range westward toward Kotzebue Sound, the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, and the northern parts of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta into Norton Sound, anywhere below 4,000 feet. Watch for a ribbon of bumps there across the inner channels to about Icy Cape and Yakutat and down through Shelikof Strait, the Alaska Peninsula, and the central and western chain. Watch for conditions to be changing around the Susitna Valley and the western passes in the Alaska Range, as well as the Cook Inlet region. As we go through the weekend, there will be changes, especially south and through the Alaska Range. That's your aviation forecast. We'll check the sea ice edge and your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. I hope you've been able to tune into the last couple of editions of Hangar Flying. We've had Doug McInnes on. Doug's currently a captain with Alaska Airlines, and he had a very faithful goat hunt on Kodiak a few years ago that is an incredible story of survival, of hardship, and I think if you watch this, you could put yourself in Doug's position, but there were a lot of things that happened to Doug that you can only credit with fate or with God's help. Anyway, I want Doug to pick it up there. He's on the rescue helicopter. He's gotten to Kodiak and the emergency room. So, Doug, pick it up there.
I learned a big lesson, and don't attempt to fly without an airplane. This is my first attempt at unpowered flight. It was not successful. The doctors in the emergency room in Kodiak had to deal with 5 life-threatening injuries. I had a flailed chest, which means multiple fractures of the rib cage, and what they did, breaking, was to puncture and collapse my left lung. As time goes by, it also began to collapse my good right lung, so they had to deal with that. Also, I was internally bleeding. I needed a transfusion. I had 2. I had both kidneys fail as a result of the major muscle damage that I incurred on my backside, and it basically just destroyed a lot of my muscle tissue. And moderate hypothermia. My core temperature was 90.3, so it was near unconsciousness in the scale of hypothermia. So the Kodiak doctors did a tremendous job dealing with those life-threatening injuries. They pretty much left my leg alone, which I'd broken my kneecap, the quad tendon completely severed, and I had a 6 to 7 inch laceration across my knee. No bleeding, but they just pretty much left that alone.
Well, you know, you kind of downplayed the hypothermia, but with a core temperature of 90 degrees, you didn't really have a lot of options when you were on that ledge. No. You know, your clothes were in the pack, and
yes.
It's not like somebody could put you in a sleeping bag.
That's correct.
So that often is the big killer.
Yes, that is. And just because you take gear with you, you expect to always have your pack with you, but I didn't. It ripped off, and if I had been alone, I would not have survived because I had no access to my gear. So the buddy system paid off with Brian helping me.
So, Doug, you know, you mentioned some of the incredible injuries you had, and I just can't imagine. But one of the things you said to me, which really struck home, was it wasn't so much the injuries that I suffered, it's the injuries that I didn't have. And there's a connection there, particularly with flying. Can you talk about that?
Yes, as anyone who is a pilot knows, if you have a heart issue or some other issue that debilitating to the body, you can't fly. And so I was concerned about that. And I did have plenty of opportunity falling down the cliff to break my neck, to hit my head which would be a major issue for a pilot. Breaking the back, limb injury.
And your hands were not damaged, right?
My hands were never damaged, nor was my head. I had a small contusion on my head, but totally insignificant. I did break a vertebra in my back, but it was insignificant as well.
Well, one way to describe how serious it was, you didn't walk for 6 months, isn't that correct?
That's correct. My first step was in March, late March. I fell in September, and in March was my first step. So it was a long, long recovery. The lung was a major issue, breathing and the leg as well, both.
When you went to the flight surgeon for the first time, how did that go?
Actually, it was very interesting. I took the flight physical when I started feeling good. I was walking, I could run a little bit, and my heart rate would go up, but I felt pretty good. So we went in, and the doctor said, "Hey, you passed, but I'm going to forward this medical to the FAA because I want them to look at it, being that you've had so many injuries." They looked at it, the FAA looked at it, and found, oh, he had a heart attack. So that was a surprise. He came back, disproved, and that was kind of in September. I finally got to talk to the doctor about it. So it was almost 3 months after I had the physical that I actually talked to the doctor about what the FAA looked at and what they came up with and why they determined it was a heart attack. So he wanted to show me because he thought they were right. So I went back to the doctor. I had the advice of a friend to have a new EKG. I had a new EKG when I visited him, the doctor, and it came out fine. So the cardiologist explained it as because of the trauma I suffered in the fall, it was a bruised heart, which is a damaged muscle, which is what a heart attack is. So the cardiologist believes that's the cause of the indication of a heart attack.
Wow.
So I was able then to get approval and get back to flying, which was a real blessing.
Well, I got to tell you, it's an incredible story. Anybody that watched it, I think, would just, I mean, there's not much you can say, it's just speechless. And I will say it's great to have you back on flying status, and I can tell you that a lot of people that I know in Alaska Airlines think very highly of you as a very thoughtful and dedicated pilot. And I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experiences.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight and all the other programs we had with Doug. Just an incredible story and a lot of lessons to be learned there, but for the grace of God is a saying that's got a lot of meaning. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Till next time, fly safe.
Cold air is coming, and that could move the ice edge a little bit further to the south and to the west and probably grow the ice a little bit around Bristol Bay. But the one thing that's going to level that out just a little bit with the amount of cold that's coming is the amount of wind that could be coming too. If it's cold and still, of course, there's a much better chance that ice is going to grow. But if it's really cold and windy, there might be a little bit of that mitigation there for how much ice grows inside of Bristol Bay and along the current ice edge. And a little bit of low concentration ice across Cook Inlet still remains. Hard to find sometimes, but there will probably be more after the weekend. Here's a look at the forecast in southeast. Southeasterlies coming up the outer coast at 22-30 knots with 11 to 12 foot seas. Along the Lynn Canal, northerlies at 15. Southeasterlies in Clarence Strait at 25 with 5 foot seas. For Sunday, winds continue out of the north at 15 all the way through Stevens Passage and southward until you get to Clarence Strait at 20 knots with a 4 foot sea. The outer coast winds are coming up from 30 to 35 knots with 12 to 13 foot seas there on Sunday. For south central, look for northerlies coming down Cook Inlet past Cowgan Island and the western Barrens to a northeasterly flow into the Shelikof Strait region at 20 knots with a 6 foot sea. Northerlies also coming down Kodiak Island and the eastern Barrens, but look for winds to strengthen inside of Prince William Sound and the northern Gulf, 25 to 35 knots there with 6 foot seas inside of Prince William Sound Saturday, and more of an easterly flow on Sunday there with southeasterlies still going across the north and western Gulf at 20 to 30 knots with seas ranging from 9 to 13 feet. North and northeasterly winds will continue down Cook Inlet at 15 to 25 with 3 to 7 foot seas there, 7 foot seas west of the Barrens, and inside of Shelikof Strait a northeasterly flow at 15 with a 4 foot sea. For the Alaska Peninsula and areas inside of Bristol Bay, 30 knots with a northeast wind, 9-foot seas there. Watch for freezing spray in the region. 25 knots with a northeast flow a little further down the coast. A 10-foot seas expected with 13 to 14-foot seas on the Pacific coast. Also watching for freezing spray on Saturday and Sunday. Northerlies will kick in. It will be a colder day on Saturday, 20 to 30 knots along the Bering Sea coast with 4 to 10-foot seas heading down to the south, and 8 to 9-foot seas across the Pacific coast with 25 knots there out of the north on Sunday. Across the chain, north and easterly winds all at 25 knots with 9 to 11-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast and 14 to 15-foot seas there on Saturday. By Sunday, a little bit of a shift out west, but by and large, very little changing there. 30 knots north of Nikolsky and Unalaska on a northerly flow with 10-foot seas along the Bering Sea coast and 10 to 11-foot seas across the Pacific and 8-foot seas out in the west of Kiska. North and northeasterly winds coming off the YK Delta and through the Bering Strait. Look for 8-foot seas around the open waters in St. Matthew, 11-foot seas around the Pribilofs, and of course freezing spray south of the ice edge on Saturday. For Sunday, very little change, a little bit more of a northerly shift there. Winds still coming out of the north, 25 to 30. 5-foot seas around St. Matthew, 9-foot seas around the Pribilofs, and 6-foot seas around the Kuskokwim Bay. Again, still watching for freezing spray. Across the north slope, north and easterlies for the Beaufort Seacoast, 15 to 20, 20 to 30 knots coming down the Chukchi Seacoast. Outside of Kotzebue Sound, 30 knots there on Saturday, becoming 35 on Sunday, and east and northeasterly winds continue for the Beaufort Seacoast and around the Chukchi Sea again, 25 to 35 for Sunday. Recapping tonight's weather, snow is coming for south central into the interior and the eastern interior in the 40-mile country. Winter storm warnings and advisories are posted between Fairbanks and Anchorage, and there will be rain and snow in the region on Sunday again. The heaviest snow looks to be generally south of the Denali National Park entrance, where you could see a foot to a foot and a half. Some of that heavy snow will be found east of Delta Junction into the 40-mile country as well. Watch for heavy snow in those areas by Saturday night and early Sunday morning. Drive careful and make sure if you're going out to recreate, people know where you're going, have an escape plan, and know the terrain that you're going into so that you can arrive home alive. Have a great weekend and be safe, everybody. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.